Hey you guys, we've already talked about rhombi, rectangles, and squares, so today we're just going to talk about some theorems associated with those shapes. So let's look at the first one. The first theorem says the diagonals of rectangles and squares are congruent. And just remember, a square is a rectangle, so if something's true for a rectangle, then it's also true for a square. So here we have rectangle LEGO, so that means that the length of this diagonal is congruent to the length of this diagonal. They're equal, so if this was 10 centimeters, then this diagonal would also be 10 centimeters. And then here we have square WXYZ. Same thing, we have XZ would be congruent to WY, so if the length of this diagonal was 5 inches, then WY would also equal 5 inches. Let's look at the next theorem. It says the diagonals of a rhombus and square are perpendicular. So what that means is that where the diagonals intersect, it forms 4 right angles. And remember, right angles equal 90 degrees. So here we have rhombus GRAF. So GA is perpendicular to RF. That just means that they make 4 right angles where they intersect there in the middle. All right, and then we have square LION, and then their diagonals also. So you have 4 right angles in the corners because it's a square. And then where the diagonals meet or intersect is also 4 right angles because the 2 diagonals are perpendicular. Remember, perpendicular lines intersect to form 4 right angles, and right angles equal 90 degrees. All right, let's look at one more theorem. And this theorem states that each diagonal of a rhombus and square bisects a pair of opposite angles. So that all that means, you guys, is when you have a diagonal, this angle it's hitting right here, it's cutting it in half. Bisects means to cut into 2 equal parts. So here we have rhombus, CARE, and all that means is that this diagonal is slicing these 2 angles perfectly in half. So angle 1 is equal to angle 2, angle 5 is equal to angle 6. And remember, because it's a parallelogram, opposite angles are also equal. So whatever 1 and 2 are equal to, that's the same thing that 5 and 6 are also going to be equal to. And then you have diagonal EA, it cuts these 2 angles in half. So 3 here is equal to angle 4, and angle 7 is equal to angle 8. But just like I said before, because it's also a parallelogram, opposite angles are equal. And if it's cutting it into 2 equal angles, then whatever 3 and 4 are equal to, 7 and 8 must also be equal to. So if angle 2 is 30 degrees, then angle 1 is 30 degrees. Angle 6 is 30 degrees. Angle 5 is 30 degrees. And so on. And because a square is also a rhombus, according to the quadrilateral family tree, the same is true for a square. But let's think about this. If the diagonals of a square are cutting its opposite angles into perfect halves, if those diagonals are bisecting those angles, well, I know that angle is 90 degrees. What happens if you bisect 90 degrees? Well, what's 90 divided by 2? That's going to be 45 degrees. So what you get when you have the diagonals of a square is 8 45-degree angles are created. See, right here? And then remember, these 2 diagonals are perpendicular, so these are also right angles. Let's do some examples with these theorems. All right, let's look at the first one. All right, I see these 4 congruent sides, so I know that this is a rhombus. It tells me that the measure of angle BAD is 80 degrees, so I'm going to go over here and draw on that. BAD, that's this whole angle right here is 80 degrees. And it wants to know the measure of angle BAE, angle BAE. So I know the diagonals of a rhombus bisect these angles. So if this whole angle, if BAD, this thing right here is 80 degrees, then I know that this little part right here has to be exactly half of 80 degrees, which is 40 degrees. You just take 80 and divide it by 2, and you would get 40. So if they give you the whole outside angle and you want one of these little ones, you'll have to divide by 2. All right, let's look at the second one. It says given rectangle WXYZ, so they tell me, hey, yo, this is a rectangle. If XZ is 46, so XZ, that's this diagonal right here. This whole thing is 46. Find WY. Well, WY is this other diagonal. And what did the theorem say about the diagonals of rectangles? The diagonals of rectangles are congruent. So if XZ is 46, guess what? WY is also 46 because diagonals are congruent. WY is congruent to XZ. So their measures are equal. Let's look at another one. It says, given square WI and D, so we have a square. They told us, find WN if DI is 14. So here's DI, that's this diagonal, it's 14. And they want me to find WN. Well, again, a square is a rectangle. And I know that squares and rectangles have diagonals that are congruent. So if DI is 14, then WN has to also be 14. Let's look at another one. Just 2 more, you guys. All right, it says, given square MAZE, find the measure of angle MDE. So let's look over here, MDE. So we have the diagonals of a square, and it wants to know what this angle is going to be. Well, we had a theorem that said the diagonals of rhombus and a square are perpendicular to each other. So I know that where the diagonals intersect, I have 4 right angles. So what is the measure of angle MDE? Well, it's going to be 90 degrees because these diagonals are perpendicular to each other. MZ is perpendicular to AE because that's what my theorem says. So 90 degrees. Gotcha. All right, and then number 5 says given rhombus WHOA, if the measure of angle WHX, so WHX, that's this little angle right here, it says that that is 20 degrees. Find the measure of angle WHO. So this is like the first one we did, except instead of giving us the big angle and asking for the small one, it's giving us the small one and it wants the big one. Well, we know when we have a rhombus that the diagonals are bisecting these angles. So that means whatever this little angle is, that's what this angle has to be also. So if this is 20 degrees, then that means this angle is also 20 degrees. Bisect, cuts into 2 equal parts. So what would the big angle be if this one's 20 and this one's 20? Well, the angle addition postulate says I'm just going to add those bad mamma jammas together. So the measure of angle WHO would have to be 20 plus 20, which is 40 degrees. All right, that's it for the day. Have a wonderful afternoon.